Mark Carney is not a member of Parliament, but he is, in fact, Canada's new Prime Minister. After Mark Carney's landslide victory at the Liberal leadership race, which took place on Sunday. And the Liberals are thrilled by this because they think they can finally turn the page on the Trudeau years and sort of embark on the new task of persuading Canadians that a brand new chapter lies ahead. Carney will no doubt have to explain to his godson how he beat Chrystia Freeland 8% to 86%, especially since his godson happens to be Chrystia Freeland's son. Now, it's really difficult to watch Carney's speech and to look at Carney's record and the moves he's already made since being selected as Liberal leader without a really healthy dose of déjà vu. Canadians weary of sky-high housing prices, unaffordable inflation, and rising taxes, however, will no doubt be delighted to see that we have exchanged Justin Trudeau for Justin Trudeau's top economic advisor, and cash-strapped Canadians can look forward to a prime minister committed to economic growth rather than suicidal green policies now that the former, United Nations Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance is at the helm. Does not sound promising, but what has Carney said about economics and finance as it relates to climate? Surely he's not the kind of person who believes that net zero, which crushes industry, is the best way forward. Well, take a look at this clip here.
I would say I see myself as part of the social movement. I think those at the vanguard of the social movement might see me as being farther behind. And I've, absolutely full credit, and I do in the book, to Greta Thunberg, who I've had the pleasure of meeting several times, and who absolutely has catalyzed that movement, the youth movement, and also done something incredibly valuable. And this is embarrassing to admit, but I think we should admit it. And this is often true, by the way, in finance. Very obvious truths are not fully understood in the system. So what she hammered home was the carbon budget, how small it was, how rapidly it was being depleted. And we've moved in a few short years, in part because of her, from a world of ESG, sustainability, broader conversations around, as I say, sustainability, to a relentless focus on net zero. It's called the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero for a reason, because we've moved to the relentless logic of having to get emissions down consistent with the carbon budget. So in that regard, I'm part of that and part of mapping what people want to the mechanisms, particularly in finance, in order to deliver it.
That clip highlights what is very true about Mark Carney, which is that he's a radical, but he wears a suit. He's not performative like Justin Trudeau was, but he's kind of like a watermelon, green on the outside, but red on the inside. But there's more, because we're already kind of getting a look at how the Mark Carney new chapter for the Liberal Party is going to look. Canadians appalled by Canada's reputation as an international cautionary tale due to our euthanasia regime, which has already resulted in over 60,000 Canadians dying at the end of a needle, will no doubt be delighted to discover that Mark Carney has actually tapped the Justice Minister responsible for that fiasco, David Lametti, to assist in his transition into government. David Lametti, you might remember, did not think that the initial Trudeau euthanasia bill went nearly far enough, and he's the one who spent most of his tenure pushing to expand euthanasia to those suffering only for mental illness. And this track record has earned him a position on Mark Carney's transition team. But I guess we have to be somewhat understanding, because Carney once co-captained the Oxford University Ice Hockey Club with David Lametti back in the 1990s. And just to give you an idea, I know my position on euthanasia might lead people to think that I'm being hyperbolic about how bad things are in Canada. But in the UK right now, they're debating euthanasia. You've got the Kim Leadbeater Committee that's discussing what their assisted suicide bill is going to look like. And even the most radical pro-euthanasia supporters and activists and politicians in the UK recoil whenever they're compared to Canada. And they say it's actually unfair and fear-mongering to be compared to Canada because that's just too far. killer. That gives you an idea of where Canada's at. And the man responsible for creating that, again, looks like he's going to be a key figure on Carney's team. It's not just that, though. Carney, who the Liberals are assuring us is the kind of very discerning, wise, responsible leader that we need to navigate these troubling times, is giving us a lot of evidence of what his discernment and wisdom looks like. In fact, he's chosen former Trudeau cabinet minister Marco Mendicini as his chief of staff. Now, some of you may remember Marco because he was the minister responsible for sadistic schoolgirl killer, Paul Bernardo, being transferred out of a maximum security prison. And then to assuage all the understandable outrage from Canadians, because Paul Bernardo is probably one of the top 3 most infamous serial killers in Canadian history, Mendicino just lied to everybody about it. But by the way, Paul Bernardo still hasn't been transferred back to a maximum security prison. And in fact, Mendicino's lies were considered so egregious and his botching of that position so terrible that even Trudeau ended up getting rid of him in cabinet. And you have to realize that in order to screw up badly enough to get kicked out of Trudeau's cabinet, you usually have to be a woman. And so that's just an extraordinary thing to happen. And yet, he is being tapped by Mark Carney. Liberals are also probably very happy that they're going to be able to move past the Trudeau government's position on the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, because some of you may remember that a federal Canadian court actually ruled that the Trudeau government violated the Canadian Charter rights of Freedom Convoy protesters after they initiated the Emergency Measures Act to crack down on peaceful protesters in Ottawa, people who are protesting vaccine mandates. Although, again, Carney's new chief of staff comes up here as well, because it was Marco who stated that the police had actually asked the government to implement the Emergency Measures Act and that it was necessary to clean up the streets of Ottawa. That was, though, directly contradicted by the RCMP commissioner, who said that the police had said no such thing. And taking a look back at Mark Carney's own record, even though at this point he was just a finance guy, although also Justin Trudeau's top economic advisor, he very early on in the Freedom Convoy protest actually wrote an editorial for the Globe and Mail. And he described what these protesters were doing. This is before they'd been there for weeks, by the way. He described it as sedition. And in case you're wondering what sedition means, here's the Oxford Dictionary definition of that term. Language or behavior intended to persuade people to oppose their government and or incite rebellion against it. Well, we can't have that, can we? And with Prime Minister Mark Carney, we won't. Presumably, though, Carney will continue the Trudeau government's ongoing attempt to appeal the federal court's ruling that the Emergency Measures Act was unreasonable, because, of course, sedition must be dealt with. So it's interesting because Liberals have also talked about how exhausted they are by the performative wokeness of Justin Trudeau in particular. And this was a hilariously hypocritical comment made by Chrystia Freeland on Bill Maher's American late night show. We discussed that in our last episode of The Briefing. And I guess Liberals can be pretty reassured that there is nothing performative at all about Mark Carney. But at the same time, Carney holds all of Trudeau's views, but does so while kind of looking like Stephen Harper. And so here's how he responded to the idea that Canadians need to repudiate wokeness. Quote, "There's a fever gripping America, and while it rages, Canadians will remain resolute and true to our values. While America engages in a war on woke, Canadians will continue to value inclusiveness." In other words, according to Mark Carney, wokeness is here to stay, but from now on, it will have a more competent champion who never plays dress up. This actually makes it a lot harder for conservatives to win, because one of the things that was good about Justin Trudeau is that he did become kind of almost an international symbol of the of the excesses of wokeness, because so much of his sort of substitute drama teacher flair really kind of showed how frivolous so much of the woke worldview was, especially when contrasted with the economic pain that Canadians were feeling and the real world problems that the globe is grappling with at the moment. But with Mark Carney, it's going to be a lot more difficult because, again, he holds the same worldview as Justin Trudeau, but he's going to be a lot more competent and a lot less showy at implementing that worldview. And from where I'm sitting as a conservative person, that is very much not a good thing. And just to give you an idea of how hand in hand Carney and Trudeau actually are, Carney thanked Trudeau during his acceptance speech on Sunday after winning the Liberal leadership race in a landslide. Now, very often these speeches are a way of kind of distinguishing yourself from the previous candidate, especially when the only reason you got a crack at the top job is because the previous prime minister's popularity rating was at rock bottom. Right, back in January when he resigned, Justin Trudeau's personal popularity was something at 24%. But Mark Carney put no daylight between himself and the prime minister at all. Here's what he said. Prime Minister Trudeau, my time doesn't permit me to recognize all of your accomplishments, so I will speak at a higher level. You have combined strength and compassion every day as a fighter for Canada. You have led us through some of the hardest challenges that this nation has ever faced, including, of course, his own prime ministership. At the same time, you have transformed Canada. Also, unfortunately true. You have transformed it, he repeats. You have lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty by moving reconciliation forward. No idea what those two things have to do with each other. And by defending freedom and democracy here and across the world. Thank you, sir. I guess we're defending freedom and democracy around the world by, well, we did applaud a Ukrainian Nazi in the House of Commons, and presumably we're going to send some of our canoes helmed by non-binary people over to help the Ukrainians in the ongoing struggle. Canada's military has been devastated under Justin Trudeau. The military recruitment has gone through the floor. I have quite a number of friends in the military and the Navy, and morale is at rock bottom. They can't even afford to buy their own new uniforms half of the time. So I have no idea what Mark Carney's going on about, but he should actually talk to some members of Canada's military. That is the rank and file. So obviously he's not distinguishing himself from Trudeau because I guess by affirming all of Trudeau's accomplishments, he's also affirming his own accomplishments because he had a lot to do with them. Again, he was the top advisor. He did take a moment, though, to kind of herald the dawn of a new era. He said, I feel like everything in my life has helped prepare me for this moment. 2 months ago, I put up my hand to run for leader because I felt like we needed big changes. Well, based on the people he's chosen, what big changes is he referring to? If he thinks Trudeau has transformed Canada and was a brilliant leader, what does he want to change? But anyways, the Liberals were really thrilled. They were overjoyed at their convention that they got rid of Trudeau and picked a far more respectable and mature-looking version of Trudeau. And David Lametti and Marco Mendicini and the Liberals clapped. And they hope, and Canadians know, that they are just the people to bring about the big changes that Prime Minister Mark Carney will surely champion. And even Trudeau seemed like he was in a pretty decent mood, all things considered, because who knows? Maybe he'll land a job as Mark Carney's top economic advisor. Thanks so much for joining us on The Bridgehead today. If any of you have any stories that we should cover, please drop a comment below. If you have any vigorous disagreement or heckling you'd like to do, please drop those comments as well. You can find our content wherever you download your podcast. And if you found this content helpful, please do share the video or like it. Thanks so much for listening.